Today, we're going to a salt mine in Krakow, Poland. And salt has traditionally always been extremely important to people. If you go back several thousand years, you find that people were mostly making salt by evaporation of seawater. This is a very big industry around the Mediterranean. Now, people up in Northern Europe didn't do much salt evaporation. And the reason for that is because the environment is not conducive to that. But if you go back to Rome's early days, about 3,000 years ago or so, you find a lively salt trade coming up from southern Italy and going over the Alps to supply Northern Europe. This was an extremely important trade, and Rome was a little village at the time, not the big empire that you always think about. And when it was a little village, it went to the expense of building a bridge over the Tiber River, because the Tiber River was difficult for the salt people to cross. And therefore, they were going to be using that particular bridge. And because they were going to be using that bridge, the Romans figured they could tax the use of their bridge. And that's how they made their money originally. When Roman soldiers were initially paid in the early Republic, they would have gotten a little bag of salt. And that's where the phrase comes from, "You weren't worth your salt." That's how you were paid. Incidentally, the word salary also comes from the word salt. Well, after a while, people in Northern Europe started needing so much salt that they needed to find their own resources, and that's what they did. This is where the salt mine in Krakow, Poland is located. And this is the symbol for the salt industry at this location. Notice the tools that the workers have in their hands. Those are the picks that they used to pull out the salt. The salt mine, of course, is deep underground. There are 800 stairs that you have to take to get to the bottom. Oh, and did I mention that there are 800 stairs that you take in order to get to the bottom? It's a long way down. The stairs, however, are very nice wooden stairs and well illuminated. The walls and ceiling are supported by very thick logs, very heavy wood. Along the route, you'll find various ropes, very thick ropes, and rollers and pulleys and winches and capstans and all kinds of equipment that would have been used in the mine perhaps around 15, 16, 1700 and that sort of thing. And you can see examples of them pulling salt up into the surface. Nikolai Copernicus was one of the first tourists to the mines, but not the only one. Wolfgang von Goethe was here, Alexander von Humboldt, Friedrich Chopin, John Paul II, and President Bill Clinton were here. One of the earliest stories about the salt mine was the legend of the discovery of the salt mine centers by Saint Kinga. She was a Hungarian princess who married a Polish prince. Incidentally, neither one of them ever had children. They didn't sleep together. They didn't like each other. Apparently, she was very reluctant about this marriage. But he had given her a wedding gift back in the 13th century, and she asked for salt. They had had salt mines in Hungary. That's where she grew up, and she threw her engagement ring from the prince into the Hungarian salt mine, only for it to be miraculously found inside a lump of salt unearthed at this particular salt mine in Krakow, Poland. And that established the mine as a divine gift, and Klinga became the patron saint. This story is depicted in the sculptures that you see within the mine, and it explains the origins of Poland's valuable salt deposits. Anyone who knows anything about mining knows that underground explosive gases can appear. And these guys have burning pitch torches, and they're trying to set off a small explosion in order to avoid a big one. About a century after Princess Kinga, the salt mining production really got started by being taken over by the King of Poland, in this case, Casimir III, and he turned it into a major operation. This increase in production meant an increase in horsepower, real horsepower. Now, when you lower a horse down into a mine, I assume that that horse never comes back up, that he's fed and watered down in the mine. And I can't imagine that the area was more sanitary as a result of all of that. In any event, this next scene is of a model of the capstan that you just saw. Now, if you're familiar with mining technology of the time, you understand that one of the big problems is how you handle water. And they had water problems here as well. And this is basically how they worked it out with pumps and water wheels. Now, the salt miners apparently got pretty bored mining salt, and they took to carving. The statues that you saw of Saint Kinga, for example, are made out of salt. And some of the salt figures that they made were more whimsical, like these salt figures of dwarves doing the salt mining. Now, being salt miners, or miners of any kind for that matter, they were constantly in some danger. And so from dwarves, their attention pretty quickly spread to
religious objects, chapels, and so forth. Now, this is pretty likely the most famous, or at least most photographed, room in the salt mine. And it's a very complicated series of salt sculptures. And you have to keep in mind that the people that are doing these are not professional sculptors. These are simply salt miners. The first scene that I'm going to be coming up to has to do with the Bethlehem story, Christmas, and of course these photographs were taken near the Christmas time anyway, so you'll see a Christmas tree. And now you see the Magi. Coming up shortly is the Jesus' first miracle, the changing of water into wine. Next is the salt miners' version of the Last Supper. And finally, we have one of a salt miner carrying his lamp. Next, we have more stairs and some water reservoirs or pools of some kind. I'm not sure what's making the water the color that it is, whether it's something that's naturally in the salt or whether that water has been dyed or whether it's something else. But this next room is the tallest room in the salt caverns. Now my guess is that this room is 4 or 5 stories tall. The following room is dedicated to Schubert, and you'll be hearing his music playing in the background. We're moving now into more modern technology and getting close to the end of the tour. You can see the rails for the trains or carts at the bottom of this photo. By the end of the tour, you're 135 meters underground. That is considerably more than 400 feet. And the good news is, you remember those 800 stairs that you had to go down? Well, there is an elevator back up to the surface. Now, one last thing, if you wanted to know more about salt, there is a book on it. I have a copy, and it is called Salt, a World History. And it will tell you all kinds of things about salt that I haven't mentioned. One of the things that it does mention is why Europe at this particular period, around 1600, needed so much salt. It has to do with the Hanseatic League. They established a very large fishing fleet, and eventually they had so much fish they didn't know what to do with all of it. And they solved their problem by going to the Pope and advocating for meatless Fridays. And along with a small bribe, the Pope agreed. And that's why fishing became so profitable. Now, the problem with fishing is keeping that fish fresh. The traditional way of doing that is to dry them on racks However, that's inconvenient in this kind of fishing industry. You want to pack them instead in salt. And every time that you have a salted fish, the fish is outweighed by the salt, 6 to 1.